The bandit encampment, located in the dusty outskirts of Xenassus, homes all sorts of degenerates and outlaws. A group where only strength matters, the outlaws capture nobles to ransom back to their families, or kill them if they refuse to pay. Hoisting the prisoners into suspended cages, they are mercilessly taunted and tortured by their brutal capturers.
What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Craft Lair. I am the Crafter. This is the Lair. Today I am completing a massive bandit encampment set. I printed out a whole number of models from Cast and Play. That's like a Patreon as well. I believe they have a web store on My Mini Factory. You can go on, download this enormous set of bandit stuff. So it comes with all sorts of bandit minis. It came with a few different tents to print out, like bandit tents, as well as all the accessories for the camp that you need. Things like crates and weapon stands, bed rolls, all this cool stuff. It came with some really awesome prisoner cages. They're like vertical, cylindrical prisoner cages. I thought those were really awesome. So awesome, in fact, that I made a crane type device and 3D printed that out so it could kind of hold on to some of these jail cells. So I'm going to be giving that away. Check the link in the description for that STL file. We're also going to be building a number of really cool hills and canyons to kind of use as set pieces for all of these tents and parts of the encampment, and I'm going to use some of the barricades from my last build to really tie everything together. I'm excited about that. And I generally make things to go along with some of the really cool Patreons that I support to kind of augment and make those even better than they were before. So stick around, it's going to be a fun build. I'm really excited to get this done, and enjoy.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Craft Lair. I've got a really exciting build coming up for you today. I just want to take a quick look at some of the models that I'll be printing out and painting in this video. To start, we'll take a look at a number of these Cast and Play miniatures. These come from their Patreon. These are pre-supported, and I believe they do retail these on My Mini Factory, the entire set, for about $60. You get quite a lot. I do think it is worth it, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So I'll be printing out nearly every piece that comes with this bandit encampment. There's like a watchtower, barricades, which you saw in the last video, tents, sleeping rolls, all sorts of like equipment and things like that. Some really great cages that are very detailed, and these are what I'm going to use and base one of my own sculpts on, and a whole host of other accessories. For the things that I've modeled, I actually built a holder that kind of functions. It is a functional piece of engineering, so you can print it out and put those pieces together, and you can actually turn the little crank to get your cages to move up and down. It's a little tricky and it doesn't work great, but it does actually work. So I 3D modeled this cage holder, and then I actually also 3D modeled a crappier version of a hanging cage, just in case you don't subscribe to the Cast and Play Patreon. I wanted you to be able to have a cage to go with it, so I made a very simple rudimentary one, but I do recommend buying the Cast and Play more detailed hanging cage because it comes with padlocks and the door is open, and I believe they have versions with prisoners inside and things like that. So it is a much better set than the one that I provided here. And lastly, I 3D modeled this horn. This would work with like the watchtower. It's actually designed to fit right in there. I forgot completely that I had modeled this until I was done building the entire set. So I'll print this out myself and build it another time, and I'll include the STL files for free in the description so you can download this yourself. But you won't be seeing the build in the video, unfortunately. Too many models to make and too little time. So I have a number of the models here printed out. I did most of these back in June and have had these sitting for quite a while, so I'm excited to get this build underway and finally paint up a number of these bandits and all their accessories to go with it. To get started, I'm using some Woodland Scenics rock mold and some plaster of Paris. I'll be using these on various kind of hills and outcroppings that are going to coincide with these bandit camp pieces. I love using these rocks, way cheaper than 3D printing them, and very quick. This stuff dries in about half an hour, so I highly recommend picking up some of those molds. And I'm going to be putting some of these 3D printed pieces, like the watchtower, like some of the bandit tents, onto some foam core bases, so you know, I can put like a little hill and have the watchtower sitting on top of that. I think it'll just kind of look cooler. Skipping ahead there, I just stacked some XPS foam and added in some plastered rocks, so I just cut some notches using a knife so those plaster rocks can fit in there nicely, and then seal all that up with a bit of drywall compound. So the watchtower was actually hanging off just a little bit on this particular hill, so I wanted to kind of embed it a little better and make it look like it wasn't this plastic object just sitting on top of this hill. So I carved up some little square dowels and used that to push into the XPS foam, so there's almost like a framing there for this watchtower to sit on. And I did decide to keep the top of this particular hill and a number of the other hills I'm creating perfectly flat. That way I can keep the hill separate from the watchtower and make everything kind of disassemble smaller, because the watchtower is a good 5-6 inches on top of the hill. If I were to glue that all together, it'd be kind of difficult to store. So I'm just going to keep this hill nice and flat and drop the watchtower on top when necessary, or use the hill without a watchtower on top, because you don't really have to use it if you don't want to. Also using some gravel and some coarse aggregate construction sand to get some interesting looking gravel and rocks surrounding those hills, and going back and doing the same thing for some of these other accessories. I wanted the two tents to be on their own bases again, and again I'm going to be leaving these generally flat so I can have these tents stay there without getting off kilter or anything like that. And one of the first steps for that was just kind of measuring this out, and the command tent that I'm doing here was much larger than the smaller tent. And originally I was going to have this huge kind of, I wanted this to look like it was in a desert canyon. Like, I think it's important to think about the story when you're making these type of models. These are bandits that live in kind of like a dusty, arid environment, and yeah, there could be large canyons and rock outcroppings that they could ambush travelers on and things like that. So that was my kind of theme for this. So I wanted my environment to reflect that. And originally there was going to be these big canyon walls, but this foam core base was actually quite large. If you can see compared to my hand, it'd be difficult to store. And since a lot of it was actually just going to be a flat base for the large command tent to sit on top of, I end up cutting down most of this foam core, and you'll see that a little bit later. And I think it's good that sometimes plans like this can change. And here I'm building another little outcropping. So I'm thinking, as far as like a story goes, I can have the little bedrolls that came in the Cast and Play Bandit set just kind of tucked underneath this rocky outcropping as if they're using it for a little shelter. And I also had a misprint of the watchtower, so I decided to reuse that and just create a little balustrade kind of embankment. And here I am going through and cutting out that enormous kind of empty middle section. And I just cut this into a few pieces, so I use this big back canyon. I think this turned out really great, and it's again just stacked XPS, a few plaster rocks, some gravel, and drywall compound to mesh all those layers so you can't see the individual foam layers, and go through and just bevel that down and clean up those edges. And I also cleaned up some of the extra little hills that I had put onto the side of that large foam core base, so this didn't all go to complete waste. I could have those little tiny hills as line of sight blocking scatter on my table. From there, after a coat of white paint and brown ink on everything, I really like now using my airbrush and painting most of the terrain with inks. So by starting with brown, I get that nice dirt color beneath a lot of the gray stone. Again, go in with gray and start working those values lighter and lighter. Overall, this brown was a bit red, so I was kind of battling what my color palette was going to be for this for a while, but eventually I kind of toned it down and got it much more natural looking, while still trying to keep in some of those brown striations and natural colorings. Again, just working on some of my colorings here, bringing in a little bit of greens to some of these rocks, where there'd be any kind of like mold or mildew or fungus kind of growing on some of them. And lastly, come in with a bit of a dry brush and just kind of bring out some of those highlights. So I used some homemade dark brown wash with a little bit of jet dry, and came in and just kind of slapped that onto most of these terrain pieces in order to bring out some of those little details and things like that. So I have quite a number of terrain pieces for this. I think there's about 7 or 8, ranging from large to small ones. So this will create some really dynamic kind of scatter pieces that you can rearrange and have different shapes to your entire encampment. As I go through and paint most of these items brown, I did want to use a few different shades of brown for all of these objects. You put in that little like spindle with the gear that's attached to the spindle by default, and then there's a little latch that you can use to prevent the gear from kind of like unspooling and dropping your prisoner down to the ground. I think it'll make a little more sense once you download the model and open it up and take a look for yourself. You can always print it and glue it all together and make it not actually functioning, because it really doesn't need to. It's just kind of for added fun of the model building process. From there, I added some basing to a number of these things. So the 3D printed cast and play set came with these cool banners for your bandits. I painted on some little symbols and heraldry onto that, and went through and painted up the rest of these details. Pretty straightforward stuff. And again, when painting these things, it's cool to try to think about what it would be like in the natural world, where rain would collect on some of these gritty fur tents and create mold problems and things like that. It really gets for a more realistic, cooler end result. Originally, I tried to build the spindle in 2 sections so you could actually turn the left side and the left cage would go up, and you turn the right side and the right cage would go up, but that just did not work. So you saw me replace the spindle with one solid one that just has 2 holes on it, so the spindle raises and lowers both cages simultaneously. And went through and painted up the rest of these details. Pretty straightforward stuff. I wanted my tents to look a little different, so for one tent I did that kind of like an army military green, and another tent I did that in like a khaki, and then added in some green where the folds would be, where some of this fungus and mold would collect on some of the canvas. Here I am going with these chains. I got these from Michaels for a couple bucks. They're like jewelry, very cheap chains, and I used the large ring. It's like a key ring, so I just opened that up, put it onto the cage. I'm running the chain up through this pulley, quote unquote pulley. The pulley doesn't actually move, it's just a modeled piece of plastic. If you run that chain to the central post, you can put it through the little eyelet and run it down to the spindle and tie it off there. I recommend using rope. The chain made it a little more difficult to use. I think rope would be just fine, so I have some very thin like hemp string, and that worked great for holding these up. I do think the chain looks cool, but it really defeats the usability aspect of this. And same thing on the other side. Run the chain up. It goes over to the little eyelet. In the video, I actually broke my eyelet, so I made it larger and a little stronger in the version that I'm giving away. But here you can see we have our cages near the top, and I believe I show it in action at some point. Going through and using some ink on the tents. This is pretty much some of the last bits of painting we have to do. As we get near the end here, I'm going through with some Vallejo weathering pigments and just adding in some dirt and dust to some of these edges. I love this stuff, couldn't recommend it more. For $20, I got 4 of these jars of pigments, and I think I've made about, I don't even know how many terrain pieces, quite a bit, and I've only used half of them. So I really couldn't recommend this stuff more. It makes everything look immediately much more realistic, and I just used a little bit of hairspray to seal all those down. From there, just go in and dry brush some of our tents. I recently actually got some Citadel dry paint. I got the Terminatus Stone since I consistently use that color for dry brushing, but honestly I really don't like it because I can't get the makeup brush I use into the little pot itself. So if anybody watching this has any suggestions, please let me know. I would love to be able to use those Citadel dry paints with larger size brushes. So I'm going through here and just adding in some little static bushes. I think I'm using some Army Painter ones that are great, and then I actually got some I think it was a cheaper set, but they had some like dead grass patches on Amazon. I think I bought 72 of them for $7 or something like that. I highly recommend these little bushes. So that about wraps this build up. We are looking at the entire encampment here, and I'm using a few of the pieces I made in my last 2 videos, the trees and the barricades, so be sure to take a look at those. I really enjoyed this build. It was a lot of different pieces. I love the foam terrain modeling experience more than like the painting or other aspects of it. So for me, building all these kind of foam scatter pieces was really the highlight of this, and I do enjoy the 3D modeling aspect as well. So here's our cage holder. It's looking pretty nice in the center of our table here. Our cast and play watchtower, some of these little bed rolls underneath their cave, a little cooking pot. Awesome models from cast and play. I love the look of the bandit leader. He's so badass. It comes with some cool scaffolds and other things like that that are very useful. So I highly recommend the cast and play set, and if you do get that, or if you don't even, the models that I made alongside of it work pretty well too. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe. That stuff really means a lot to me and keeps me motivated to keep on making videos. If you got friends that are into 3D printing, share my content. I'm sure they'd love to print some of this stuff out themselves. Be sure to stick around. I have some really great videos coming up. We're going to be looking at some 3D printable houses from the Town Builder Kickstarter, which is awesome. I'm going to be giving away some of those buildings as well, so you're going to want to be subscribed so you can enter into those giveaways. What else? I just built a really cool working ballista scorpion, quote unquote working, but I'm putting on the finishing touches of that, and we'll get that video up soon. So I'll be very excited to get all these pieces done, and hope you can stick around to watch them. Again, I am the Crafter, this is The Lair. I'll see you in the next one.